In this chapter, we'll take a look at a very powerful component in the Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC library called chart. This highly configurable and highly dynamic component makes data visualization a snap. But because it's so powerful, there are also many features and configuration options to consider. Telerik UI chart uses modern web technologies to render high-quality data visualizations. All graphics are rendered on the client using scalable vector graphics, or SVG, with a fallback to Canvas. The data visualization library that comes with Telerik UI offers several types of charts, including basic chart, sparkline, which is an inline element, and a stock chart, and a hierarchical data visualization component called tree map. The RPS application will use a basic chart. This should give you a good idea of how to configure and update any type of charting component available. We'll start off the chapter by looking at the anatomy of a chart, then we'll dive right in and add a chart to the RPS dashboard as per the new requirements for visualization. We'll configure the chart in its simplest form and then extend the configuration with more available options.
The Telerik UI chart is highly configurable and highly customizable. While all the configuration options are available in the docs website, let's go through some of the major ones now and the ones we'll be using in our project. This is the current state of our application. We're going to be placing the chart right here under the All Issues heading. We also want our chart to respond to filters by date, or the range here, and we also want it to respond to being filtered by the user. This filtering mechanism is already set up on our server side, so all we need to do is just present the data in the chart. Let's take a look at the completed application for reference. Here's the completed chart, and these are the parts of the chart that we're going to be using. The chart has a title that we can configure. We can give the title text. We can also give it styling, so I can control all aspects of the way this title looks. The chart also has a legend, which is automatically generated based on the name that you give to the series items. We'll talk about series in a second. So here in my case, I have open and closed items that I'm presenting visually. And this legend can be positioned anywhere around the chart. We'll look at positioning this legend in a little bit. The chart also has axes. Here we have the x-axis, which is showing dates in our case. And it also can have multiple y-axes, so multiple sets of data that it can present. In our case, we're only showing one y-axis, but the Telerik UI or Kendo chart can actually support multiple y-axes. One thing about the x-axis here is that it's a category axis. The category axis can actually contain any type of data, but if the categories contain dates, as it does in our case, then the Kendo chart automatically organizes the dates and it lays them out chronologically. From the earliest data point to the last data point, dates are treated specially, and we'll see this in our case as well. Finally, let's talk about series. You can think of series as the arrays of data that's being plotted on the chart. In our case, we have two sets of series that we're going to be plotting. Here it's presented as red and green, which stand for the closed issues and the open issues. Series can also have a type. So in our case, we're using column series, but you have different types of series available to you. Let's take a look at the documentation. Here is the demo site for the bar charts. If I back up here, you see that we have area charts, bar charts, bubble charts. This is what a bubble chart looks like. And this is what an area chart looks like. So in this case, we have an area chart represented by these colored in sets of data. You can also present different types of series together on one chart. So you can have a line series and a column series all presented in one chart. Now the chart is slightly different from other widgets in the Kendo library because you adjust a lot of the appearance of the chart using the Fluent API in your code instead of applying CSS rules or styles. Let's set up our chart in the next lesson. In this lesson, let's add a chart to our application. We're going to add it to the dashboard page right under the All Issues heading. So open up the code and then go to your Views folder, Dashboard, and make sure that the index view is open. And we're also going to be updating the dashboard controller. And in the models folder, open up the PT dashboard view model. We're going to be providing some new data to the chart. So we're going to be updating the view model for the page. Let's start with the view. Scroll down and you'll see all issues, which is in H3. So this is where we're going to add our chart. I'm going to open up some code with the parens, and we're going to use the HTML helper here and chart. Now, if you had a data array already available in your model, you can pass it right into the constructor of the chart right here. So this function will take the array of data right here, IEnumerable of t, data. But we're not going to do it that way. We're going to configure the categories and the series manually. One thing that this chart will require is the name. So make sure you have the name. I'm just going to call it chart. Once we save this and we take a look at our page, you'll see that we already have our chart that's being rendered. There's nothing in it yet, but we're going to fix that. First, let's start with the title. I'm going to bring this down to the next line, and we can add a title in line here. So this can take either a string, or we can configure the title. So let's say, for example, we're going to include a lambda here, and we want to have a more configured title. We can have the alignment, the background, the border, the color. Notice how we're configuring the styling in line here in the code instead of giving it a CSS class, for example. Text is also a property here that you can use, but we're just simply going to include text here, which is going to be all issues. And there it is. Now, to have our chart actually display some data, we're going to need to set that up first. We already have the data available that we want to show in the chart, but it's just not in a format that's going to be easy for the chart to consume. So we want to aggregate some of the counts first before we display it in the chart. The data structure has already been created for you. We just need to fetch it and use it. Open up your PT dashboard view model, and in the constructor here, we already have the PT dashboard status counts. We're going to get yet another parameter passed in here, and that's going to be PT dashboard filtered issues. There it is. I'm going to call this filtered issues. And filtered issues is going to have a few things on it. Let me go ahead and hit F12 here so you can take a look. Filtered issues has a list of closed items, a list of open items, and those are being served by this property of type list items for month, exposed as month items. This also has categories, which is a list of date times. So we're going to have the dates plotted on the x-axis. That's going to be mapped directly to these categories. And then on the y-axis, we're going to be displaying the counts of closed items and open items per month. And that's what this PT dashboard filtered issues data structure represents. And I'm going to add a couple of things here. One is going to be a list of date times, which is going to be called categories. Then we're going to have a list of integers, which is going to be items open by month. And then I'll just copy this line right here because we need items closed by month as well. Let's populate those values. So first, I'm going to initialize those arrays. Items open by month is going to be a new list. And items closed by month is also going to be a new list. We actually don't need to initialize categories because filtered issues that's coming in here is going to have categories, which is a list of date times. So I'll just set that to that. Now let's iterate through filtered issues and the month items property in there. We're going to do a for each here for each item. Items open by month. We're going to add I open and then the count. And same thing with items closed by month. So we're just aggregating the counts here, and that's all we need to do. Now we need to get this data and pass it into this view model, which happens in the controller. So right over here, I'm going to create a new variable called filtered issues. We're going to use rps-repo to get the filtered issues for us, and we're going to pass in the filter that's already in place. Once we get the filtered issues, we're just going to pass those into the view model. So that's it for the back end. Let's kick off the server and see what we can do on the front end. All right, so there's our chart. No data yet. Let's go back to the code here and open up index.cshtml, and we're going to be working on the chart here. First and foremost, let's set up the categories, which are going to be the dates. So we're going to use category axis here, and this is going to give us the configurator. So it's a lambda, and we need to configure the axis. We're going to access the categories here in the config, and we're going to pass in model.categories. Don't forget a semicolon there. Let's take a look. All right, once we do that, you can see that we have a list of months down at the bottom. So these are the categories coming in from the database. If I switch to 3 months, there we go. December, January, February. 6 months, and there we go. And you can see that we have these grid lines for every one of the months being drawn automatically by the chart. We can control that. We'll come back to that in a little bit. So now that we have the categories in here, let's take a look at how we can get the data mapped on the chart. To get the data showing up on the chart itself, we need to configure the series. Let's head back to the view and we're going to go with series here. And this is also going to use the configuration pattern here. So config, and then we're allowed to add what type of series we want to use. So do we want an area chart, or do we want a bar chart or a bubble chart? And you have quite a bit to pick from here, as you can see. What we want to do is use the column chart. And here we need to pass in the data that we want to plot. And we already have this data aggregated in model, items open, and item closed by month. And there we go. Here you can see the items open for every month. If I go to 1 year, you'll see a year's worth of data. Now, we also need to plot the items closed by month. So let's create another series item. And let's try something different. Let's do a line chart this time. I'm going to pass in items closed by month. You can also give the series a name. Now this name is different than the name we used for the widget itself. This will give our collection a name. So here, let's call this one open. And I'm going to call this one closed. Let's take a look. So here we have two series plotted. One is closed items, and that's the green line. And one is open items. That's the orange bars. And because we gave them each a name, now you can see a legend here on the right side. And this lets us know what color is associated with what graphical representation. You can also control where the legend is located, and we'll do that in a little bit. We also want the series colors to match the green and the red here that we have for closed issues and open issues. We'll fix that up. Now, because these are two different series types, it doesn't look like the data goes together very well. So I'm going to switch both of these to column so that they're both columns. And then we're going to have two columns side by side, which doesn't really look that good and it's hard to read. In our finished application, we have the series on top of one another, which is easier to read. Let's do that here. And the way we can do that is by stacking the series one on top of another. We're able to provide series defaults, which is a way to assign a collection of properties to all the series to be shared. So this is also configurable. I can configure the column series, and I can set them to be a stack. This is a Boolean that we can set to true, which is going to stack them on top of one another. And there we go. Before I mentioned that the chart is configured through code, including all the styling options that you can configure for the chart. So that's what we're going to be doing in this lesson. There's a few things I want to change about the way this chart currently looks. First of all, the theme itself doesn't really match the look and feel of my application. We're going to be talking more about themes later on in the course, but for now, we can just assign a different theme to this chart right in line here. This has a theme configurator, and I can pass in sass as the value, which will give it a more of a flat chart look. There we go. Now, the colors also don't work for me. They don't match the closed and the open issues that I already have, and this will confuse the user. So let's go ahead and change that. You can set the color on the series defaults, but this will apply to all the series. If you want to set individual colors for each of the series, you can do that here on each of these series. So for the open items, I want that to be red. Here I can pass in red as the string, or I can pass in hex values, which is what I'm going to do here to match my other red color. And for closed items, I'm going to pass in another hex value that's greenish. Now, overall, I can also apply some styling to the series defaults, and this will apply to all the series. For example, I can apply a gap, which is going to be a number, and this is going to adjust the spacing between all the bars. So I want that spacing to be small so the bars are thicker. I'm going to make that gap 0.06. And I also want to change the opacity of the bars themselves. I want them to be slightly see-through, so I'm going to set that to 0.7. This is on a scale from 0 to 1. Let's take a look at this. This is starting to look much better. We can see that the bars now match the colors of closed and open issues. The gaps in between the bars are very small, and the bars are somewhat see-through. Now, what about this legend here? I don't want this to be taking up space on the right side. This is valuable real estate for the chart data to be displayed. I want to bring this legend down to the bottom. So here I can configure the legend, and this also has the configuration using a lambda expression. So I can set leg position, and this has an enum for me that I can use. I can position it anywhere I want, and I want it on the bottom. And there's our legend on the bottom. Now our categories also have these grid lines. I like the horizontal grid lines, but I don't think we need the vertical grid lines here. That's a little bit too much. All the category related grid lines can be configured through the category configurator. So right here we have categories, and I can actually set the major grid lines here, and I can configure those as well. This will allow me to add the color, the dash type, the step. Here I just want to set the visible property to false. And this will make the vertical grid lines disappear, making a nicer looking, cleaner chart. All right, what else can we do here? Well, there's the date labels along the bottom. I can configure those as well. Using the category access configurator, I can configure the labels. You can see a pattern for me here of the way we configure the chart and a lot of other widgets in Kendo library. Here, I can configure any of these properties. I want to configure the rotation here. And this can take in either a string or an integer for the number of degrees. For example, if I set this to 30 degrees, this will rotate the labels underneath to 30 degrees. Why would you want to do that? Well, let's say you have a lot of data points here and they don't all fit horizontally. In fact, we can demonstrate that by changing the base unit. So categories has something called base unit on it. If we specify this as date, we can also specify base unit, which is going to take an enum. Now, base unit can be days, hours, or you can set it to automatically fit. Right now, we have it set to months by default. Let's set it to weeks and see what happens. There we go. As you can see, because we have a year's worth of data here and we're setting the x-axis to weeks, had I not set 30 degrees for the rotation, these week labels would have been on top of each other, which does not look very good. I would argue even that this doesn't look that great either. So there is another setting we can change here, and we can set the rotation to be automatic. So if I set this to auto, the chart will automatically calculate the best display option for those labels. So that looks much better. And if I change this to 3 months, for example, then it's not going to rotate those labels at all because they all fit just fine. So I'm going to leave it on auto. That's a good setting. And I'm going to actually switch this back to months because I like the way the months look. And that's the data point that I'm looking for. And there we go. You can take a look at the documentation for all the different available options that you can set, including the API for the charts. It's quite extensive.